The streets outside Buckingham Palace were crowded that afternoon. Tourists stood behind the black iron gates, their cameras ready, waiting to catch a glimpse of the famous royal guards in their tall bearskin hats. The air was filled with the sound of chatter, camera shutters, and the steady rhythm of boots hitting the ground as the guards marched in perfect formation. Everyone seemed to admire their discipline, except for one woman who thought she could make things a little more entertaining. Her name was Lydia. She had come all the way from the United States, and this was her first time in London. She was excited, but more than anything, she wanted to go back home with photos that would make her friends jealous. Her phone was always in her hand, ready for the next post or selfie. She had been telling everyone that she wanted to make a funny video with one of the guards, something that would get lots of attention online. Her friends told her that the guards never talk, never smile, and never react no matter what people do. To Lydia, that sounded like a challenge. As the guards changed positions, one of them stopped near the center path leading up to the palace gates. He stood tall and silent, his eyes fixed straight ahead, completely still like a statue. Lydia smiled to herself, adjusting her sunglasses and saying under her breath, "Let's see if he can ignore me for long." She walked up to the rope that separated the crowd from the guards area. A security officer standing nearby reminded tourists to keep their distance, but Lydia barely listened. She wanted to get closer than anyone else. When the officer turned his head, she quickly slipped past the rope and stood right in front of the guard. People nearby gasped. A few raised their phones, already sensing something was about to happen. Lydia grinned, posing for her camera. "Come on," she said teasingly. "You can't be that serious all day, can you?" The guard did not move an inch. His face stayed expressionless, his eyes focused forward. The silence made her more determined. She took a small step closer, waving her hand in front of his face like someone trying to wake a person from a dream. "Hello, anybody home?" she said, laughing to herself. A couple standing nearby told her to stop, reminding her that the guards were not there for entertainment. Lydia ignored them completely. She thought everyone was overreacting. In her mind, this was just harmless fun. The crowd began to murmur louder now. Some were uncomfortable, others recorded the scene. Lydia could hear people saying, "Why, she's going to get in trouble," and "You're not supposed to do that." But she just smiled wider, posing dramatically as if she were part of a comedy skit. She even tried to take a selfie, holding her phone high and angling it so the guard was in the background. When she realized he still hadn't moved, she stepped directly into his path. Her body blocked his route completely. She tilted her head, mockingly saying, "You're supposed to be guarding something, right? Well, now you have to guard me." A little boy standing behind the fence looked up at his father and whispered, "Is she allowed to do that?" The father shook his head and said quietly, "No, she's not. The guards are trained soldiers, not actors." The tension grew thicker with each passing second. The guard remained motionless, his discipline unshaken. He had been trained to ignore verbal taunts, to remain professional no matter what. But there were rules. If anyone blocked his way or interfered with his duty, he was required to take action. Lydia didn't know that. She just saw an unbothered man in a uniform and thought he was there to amuse tourists. She started pacing in front of him, mocking his serious face, saying things like, "Do you ever laugh? You must be so bored standing here all day." A few people nearby laughed awkwardly, but most turned their eyes away, embarrassed for her. One of the palace wardens began walking in her direction, but the crowd was thick and he couldn't reach her quickly. Lydia kept performing, talking loudly and even trying to mimic the guard's stance. She raised her shoulders and puffed out her chest, standing stiffly next to him and saying, "Look at me, I'm a royal guard now." Her phone camera was still recording. She wanted that perfect clip, the one where the guard finally reacted. She imagined how many likes it would get, how many people would comment saying she had made one of the unshakable guards move. But then something changed. The guard, who had been completely silent until now, suddenly moved. He took a strong step forward, his boot hitting the ground with a deep echoing thud. Lydia jumped slightly, startled by the sound. Before she could say anything, his voice rang out loud and powerful across the courtyard. "Make way for the King's Guard." The shout was so sharp that it silenced the entire crowd. Every conversation stopped. Every camera froze. Even the pigeons nearby fluttered away into the sky. Lydia's face went pale. She took a step back, completely stunned. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. The guard's eyes were still fixed ahead, his posture strong and unwavering. He didn't look angry, just completely focused. His shout wasn't out of emotion, it was part of his duty. He had warned her formally to move away. It was the only time they were allowed to break their silence, and when they did, it wasn't for games. Lydia finally realized this wasn't a joke. She stumbled back behind the rope, her phone shaking in her hand. The people around her whispered quietly, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Some clapped softly, others muttered words like, "serves her right," and "that's what happens when you don't listen." The guard didn't look at her. He simply continued his post as if nothing had happened, resuming his stillness. To him, it was just another moment in a day filled with thousands of tourists. But for Lydia, it was unforgettable. She stood in the crowd again, her heart racing. Her phone was still recording, though now the video had captured something she hadn't expected. A moment of real authority, real discipline. The people around her slowly went back to taking pictures, but she couldn't stop thinking about what just happened. For the first time on her trip, she didn't feel like laughing. Later that evening, she watched the video in her hotel room. Her own voice filled the small space, mocking, teasing, proud. Then came that thunderous command. It made her flinch even on replay. She didn't look as confident in the video as she thought she would. In fact, she looked foolish. Still, she hesitated before deleting it. There was a part of her that wondered if posting it might bring her the attention she wanted. But another part of her, the part that had seen the guard's eyes and heard that voice, felt uneasy. She wasn't sure if she wanted the world to see her mistake. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep easily. She thought about how everyone had been watching her, how they must have seen her as rude or disrespectful. She thought about the guard standing there in the heat for hours, doing his job with absolute focus while she turned it into a game. And though she didn't want to admit it, a small part of her felt ashamed. The next morning, when she went down to the hotel lobby, a group of tourists were talking excitedly about a video that had gone viral overnight. Someone had uploaded the moment the guard broke protocol to shout at a woman blocking his way. Lydia's stomach sank. She didn't need to ask which woman they were talking about. Her trip to London was supposed to be fun and carefree, but now she couldn't walk past the palace again without remembering the sound of that single command. It had been powerful, sharp, and unforgettable. For the first time, she understood what everyone else already knew, that the royal guards weren't there for show. They were soldiers, and their silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. As she walked back to her room, she promised herself she would never again treat someone's duty as entertainment. But little did she know, the story was far from over. The video that captured her mistake was spreading faster than she could imagine. And by the end of the day, millions of people around the world would know her face. By the next morning, Lydia couldn't escape the uneasy feeling that had followed her since the incident outside Buckingham Palace. The sound of the guard's deep voice echoing through the crowd still played in her mind like a scene she couldn't turn off. She kept thinking about the look on people's faces, the way they had stared at her, not with amusement but disappointment. When she finally opened her phone, she realized her mistake had traveled much further than the palace gates. The video had exploded online overnight. It wasn't her who posted it, but someone from the crowd had shared it, and it spread quickly across every social platform. The title was short and sharp: "Tourist blocks Royal Guard and instantly regrets it." It had millions of views. Lydia's stomach dropped as she scrolled through the comments. Some were laughing, others were angry. "No respect," one person wrote. "They serve their country and she thinks it's a joke." Another said, "Good on that guard for putting her in her place." She tried not to read them, but she couldn't look away. Every comment seemed to remind her how foolish she had been. Her friend, who was traveling with her, walked into the room and saw her face. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked softly. Lydia nodded without saying a word. "It's everywhere," he added, sitting beside her. "You're all over the internet." She rubbed her forehead. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just wanted to have a little fun." Her voice was quiet, like she was talking to herself more than to him. Her friend sighed. "You wanted attention and now you've got it. But it's not the kind you wanted." Lydia put her phone face down on the table. The comments kept coming in, and every few seconds another notification appeared. People had taken screenshots of her face, made jokes, even turned her moment into memes. She wanted to shut it all off, but it was too late. Once something went viral, there was no taking it back. Later that day, she decided to go out again, hoping to distract herself. She walked down the same street where everything had happened the day before. The palace was just as crowded, but now, when she looked around, she noticed people whispering. A few pointed toward her. One teenager even approached and said, "You're that woman from the video, right?" Lydia forced a smile and nodded before quickly walking away. The excitement she'd once felt about being in London had turned into embarrassment. Across the courtyard, the same group of guards stood in their places, motionless and serious. Lydia recognized the guard from the video immediately. He was back on duty, just as still as before, like nothing had ever happened. She stopped at a distance and watched him quietly this time. For the first time, she noticed the weight of his uniform, the focus in his eyes, the patience in the way he stood even when tourists shouted or took selfies nearby. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. He just did his job. A small group of people stood beside her, talking in low voices. "They're not just for show," one woman explained to her child. "They're soldiers. Every single one of them has trained for years to be here. That's why we respect them." Lydia felt those words sink in. She had heard similar things before, but now they hit differently. She thought about how she had mocked that same discipline just to get a laugh online. The guard she had treated like a statue was a real person, serving his country, and she had turned that moment into a spectacle. That evening, back in her hotel room, Lydia received a message request on social media. It was from someone she didn't know. The profile picture showed a British flag, and the message read, "You don't realize how much disrespect that was." She deleted it right away, but more messages followed. Some were mean, some just asked her why she did it. It became too much. She turned her phone off completely. She tried to focus on the rest of her trip, but the guilt followed her everywhere. Even when she visited other landmarks, she couldn't enjoy herself. Every time someone looked in her direction, she wondered if they recognized her. Every time someone raised a phone, she felt nervous. The fun, carefree tourist she had been was gone. A few days later, she sat at a small cafe near the Thames River, sipping coffee while watching people pass by. Across from her sat an older couple from Scotland who had struck up a conversation. They had seen the video too. The woman looked at Lydia kindly and said, "You know, dear, people make mistakes. What matters is whether they learn from them." Lydia nodded. "I just wish I hadn't made mine in front of the whole world," she said quietly. The man smiled faintly. "That guard, he didn't shout because he was angry. He shouted because it was his duty. You pushed his limit, but he still handled it with restraint. That's something you should respect, not fear." Those words stayed with her. That night, she opened her phone again. The video was still circulating, but something new had happened. News channels were now sharing it too, but their tone was different. Some highlighted the guard's discipline and composure, calling it a lesson in professionalism. A few articles mentioned how important it was for tourists to show respect to cultural traditions. Surprisingly, one news outlet even blurred her face in the footage, saying the focus should be on the guard, not on shaming the woman. Lydia felt a small sense of relief reading that. But she knew that wasn't enough. If she wanted to move forward, she had to do something herself. She decided to write a public post, not an excuse, but an apology. She took a deep breath and started typing. "I want to apologize for my behavior outside Buckingham Palace. What I did was disrespectful, and I understand now that it wasn't funny. I acted out of ignorance and pride, and I've learned that real strength doesn't need to react." The guard's professionalism taught me something I'll never forget. When she posted it, she didn't know how people would respond. Some ignored it. Others commented that they appreciated her honesty. A few said it was too late, but many simply wrote that everyone makes mistakes. The next morning, she woke up to find that her message had been shared hundreds of times. Even a few British users commented saying they respected her for owning up to it. That same day, she returned to Buckingham Palace one last time before her flight home. She didn't go near the guards or try to take pictures. She just stood quietly among the crowd, watching the precision of their movements. She noticed how the sound of their boots on the pavement created a rhythm that everyone around seemed to fall silent for. It wasn't just a performance, it was a tradition, something sacred. She saw the same guard again. For a moment, she wanted to walk up and apologize in person, but she knew she couldn't. It wasn't allowed, and he wouldn't respond anyway. Still, she hoped somehow he would know she was sorry. A little girl standing nearby asked her mother why the guards never smiled. The mother explained softly, "Because they're doing something important. They stand for respect and service. It's not about smiles, it's about duty." Lydia turned slightly and smiled at the girl. "Your mom's right," she said quietly. As she walked away, the crowd behind her began clapping as the guards changed position again. The moment was calm and respectful this time. Lydia took one last look before leaving, feeling like she had finally understood something she should have known from the start. On the plane home, she looked out the window and thought about how a few seconds of foolishness had turned into a lesson she would carry forever. She had come to London to take pictures and make memories, but what she got was far deeper. She had learned that respect is not a rule, it's a choice. And sometimes it takes being humbled to understand its value. Back home, as the days went by, the viral video began to fade from the internet's front page. People moved on to other stories. But for Lydia, the memory stayed. Every time she saw a soldier, a police officer, or anyone in uniform, she felt a quiet reminder of that moment at the palace. And though she wished she could go back and change what she did, she also knew something good had come out of it. The next time she traveled, she didn't rush to record everything. She didn't try to make jokes at other people's expense. She took time to observe, to listen, to appreciate where she was. Lydia had gone viral for the wrong reasons, but in the end, that one mistake helped her see the world, and herself, a little differently. A week after returning home, Lydia thought the attention from her trip would fade away. The online buzz had slowed down, and most people had moved on to other stories. But just when she began to feel like things were finally quiet again, something unexpected happened. A local news outlet from her town reached out for an interview. They wanted to talk about her experience in London and how it had changed her perspective. At first, Lydia wasn't sure if she should agree. She was embarrassed, and she didn't want to relive the mistake, but a part of her also wanted to share the lesson she had learned, especially after receiving so many harsh messages online. After thinking for a while, she agreed. When the reporter arrived at her home, Lydia looked nervous but calm. The interview wasn't long, but she spoke honestly. She told them how, in that moment at Buckingham Palace, she didn't realize how serious her actions were. She said she now understood the meaning of discipline and respect. The reporter seemed surprised by how humble she sounded. When the interview aired, people began to see her differently. Some even commented that it was brave of her to face the criticism and speak openly instead of hiding. The story reached online platforms again, but this time, the tone was softer. Headlines read things like, "Tourist from viral guard video speaks about respect and regret." Instead of laughter and mockery, many comments supported her. "She learned from it," one person wrote. "We've all done silly things. At least she's owning up to hers." It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Still, not everyone was kind. Some people continued to tease her, sharing the old video clips with rude captions. Lydia tried not to look at them. She focused on moving forward, but deep down she still wished she could talk to the guard who had shouted that day. She didn't even know his name, but his voice had stayed in her mind since that moment. She wanted him to know she wasn't the same person anymore. A few weeks later, she received an unexpected email. It came from someone who claimed to work in the communications office near Buckingham Palace. They said they had seen her interview and appreciated her apology. The message wasn't official, but it was kind. It explained that the guards were aware of how viral moments like hers could affect both sides. "They don't hold grudges," the person wrote. "They simply hope people take away the right lesson." Reading that made Lydia emotional. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear it. For days she had carried that guilt around like a heavy bag, but that one message lifted a weight off her chest. It reminded her that mistakes could lead to growth if handled the right way. She decided to write a personal letter, not to send to the palace, but for herself. In it, she described everything she had learned from the incident. She wrote about how silence didn't mean weakness and how respect wasn't about who was watching, but about understanding others. When she finished, she sealed the letter and placed it inside a small box where she kept mementos from her travels. It was her way of closing that chapter. Months passed and life slowly went back to normal. Lydia returned to work, spent time with friends, and started planning new trips. But this time her outlook had changed. She no longer traveled just for pictures or likes. She traveled to learn. When she visited historical places, she listened to the guides instead of posing for the camera. She watched, she asked questions, and she respected the customs of every place she went. People around her noticed the difference. Her friends joked that she had turned into the calmest traveler they knew. One evening, while scrolling through her phone, Lydia came across a new viral video. It showed another tourist mocking a guard much like she had done. The person in the video laughed, danced, and tried to provoke a reaction. Lydia watched in silence. She could feel her stomach twist. The comments were full of criticism, and she understood every word of it. Without hesitation, she wrote a reply. "Please learn from my mistake. These guards are not there for your entertainment. They're there to serve. Respect them." Her comment gained attention, and people noticed her name, the same woman from the original video. But this time, instead of being mocked, many thanked her for speaking up. It was strange to her how things had come full circle. Once she had been the person everyone was laughing at. Now she was the one reminding others to behave respectfully. Life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. One afternoon, Lydia was invited to a small travel discussion group in her town. It was a casual meetup where travelers shared stories and advice. She decided to attend, thinking it might be nice to connect with people who loved exploring as much as she did. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated for a moment. Then she decided to tell her story. Not the funny, edited version that had gone viral, but the real one. She spoke about how a single moment of pride had turned into a lesson she would never forget. The group listened quietly. No one laughed. When she finished, a young man raised his hand and said, "I saw that video years ago. I remember thinking it was just another tourist being silly. But hearing you talk about it now makes me realize how much more there was to it." Lydia smiled. "That's what I want people to understand," she said. "Sometimes the things we do without thinking can teach us more than we expect. I just wish I didn't have to learn it the hard way." After that day, she started writing short blog posts about her travels. Her focus wasn't on sightseeing anymore. It was on understanding culture, history, and people. Her stories were honest, simple, and real. Slowly, she built a small but loyal audience who appreciated her perspective. Many readers commented that her words made them rethink how they approached travel. For Lydia, that was more rewarding than any number of likes she had ever received online. One morning, while checking her messages, she found a note from someone in London. It was from a woman who said her husband served as a royal guard. The woman had read one of Lydia's blog posts and wanted to thank her for changing how people saw the guards. "My husband read your piece," the message said. "He told me that it meant a lot to see someone understand what their job truly represents." Lydia sat quietly for a moment after reading it, feeling her eyes well up with tears. That message was more meaningful to her than any apology she could have made in person. As time went on, the memory of that day outside Buckingham Palace stopped haunting her. Instead, it became part of her story, one she could tell without shame. When people asked her about her most memorable travel experience, she would smile and say, "The one that taught me what respect really means." But one day, something unexpected happened again. Lydia received an invitation in the mail from a travel awareness organization based in the UK. They were hosting a panel discussion about tourism and cultural respect, and they wanted her to speak. They had read her blog and thought her story would make an impact. Lydia was both nervous and honored. Speaking in front of people about the very mistake that embarrassed her once felt daunting, but she knew it was important. When she arrived in London again months later, the memories of her first visit came rushing back. She walked through the same streets, past the same souvenir shops, and stood outside Buckingham Palace once more. The crowd was as busy as ever, tourists smiling and taking pictures. She stayed behind the rope this time, just observing quietly. When the guards marched past, she noticed the same sharp rhythm of their boots and the same silence in their faces. It felt familiar but different. This time she looked at them with respect, not curiosity. A group of tourists nearby began laughing loudly, and one man joked about trying to make a guard move. Lydia turned toward him and said gently, "Trust me, it's not worth it." He looked at her, puzzled, until someone whispered who she was. He laughed awkwardly and stepped back from the rope. Later that evening, Lydia stood on stage at the event facing a full audience. She told her story honestly, admitting every mistake, every feeling of embarrassment, and every lesson she learned. She didn't try to sound perfect. She just spoke like a person who had made a mistake and grown from it. When she finished, the audience clapped, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. After the event, a few young travelers approached her to thank her for sharing. One of them said, "I used to think guards were just for show. I never thought about how much pride and responsibility their job takes. Your story changed that for me." Lydia smiled and replied, "That's all I wanted." As she left the hall and walked into the cool London night, she looked back toward the palace in the distance. The lights shimmered against the dark sky, and for the first time she felt complete peace about everything that had happened. What once began as a careless act had turned into a lesson she would carry for life. A story not about embarrassment, but about growth and respect. Months had passed since Lydia's first trip to London, and the memory of the Royal Guard incident had shifted from shame to reflection. She no longer felt the panic or embarrassment that had haunted her in the weeks after the video went viral. Instead, she carried a quiet sense of understanding, knowing that her mistake had become a lesson she could share with others. She spent her days writing, working, and occasionally looking through her old photos from London. Not for social media, but for herself. Each picture reminded her of what she had learned. One morning, she received an unexpected invitation in her email. A small group of schools and travel organizations in the UK wanted her to speak at a workshop about cultural respect and responsible tourism. They had read her story online and thought it would be a powerful example for young travelers. Lydia hesitated at first. Speaking in front of strangers about a moment that had embarrassed her so deeply felt daunting. But then she realized that this was exactly the opportunity she needed to fully turn her experience into something meaningful. After agreeing, she spent the next few weeks preparing. She wanted her talk to be honest, not exaggerated or dramatized. She didn't want to focus on the embarrassment of being viral. Instead, she wanted to convey the importance of respect, awareness, and understanding in travel. She wrote down key points, stories, and reflections from her own experiences, making sure her words would resonate with her audience. Finally, the day arrived. She flew back to London, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. As the plane touched down, memories of her first trip came flooding back. The bustling streets, the excitement of seeing famous landmarks, and the moment outside Buckingham Palace when everything had changed. She reminded herself to stay focused. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about helping others learn. The workshop took place in a community hall near the city center. Young students, teachers, and travelers from around the area had gathered. The room was bright and full of energy. When Lydia walked in, she felt a little self-conscious. She could imagine the whispers, some recognizing her, some curious about the person who had gone viral months before. She smiled politely and took her seat on the stage. When it was her turn to speak, she began simply. She talked about her love for travel, the excitement of visiting new places, and the desire to capture moments through photos and videos. She described the day at Buckingham Palace without dramatization, explaining how she had blocked the guard for a silly video, not realizing the seriousness of her actions. She spoke calmly about the sudden command, the shock she had felt, and the immediate realization of the respect and discipline required for the guard's role. The audience listened intently. Lydia could see young travelers nodding, some whispering to each other about their own experiences. She explained how her viral moment had led to both criticism and reflection. She admitted that while the online attention had initially been stressful and humiliating, it had forced her to see her mistake and learn from it. She emphasized that mistakes weren't failures, they were opportunities to grow if one was willing to reflect and change. She paused and looked around the room. "I want all of you to understand something," she said softly. "Respect isn't just about following rules because someone is watching. It's about understanding the effort, discipline, and responsibility that goes into the things we often take for granted. That guard outside Buckingham Palace wasn't being mean, and he wasn't performing for me. He was standing for something bigger than all of us: duty, tradition, and service." The room was quiet. The students seemed captivated, perhaps recognizing how easy it was to overlook respect in the moment, especially when caught up in excitement or curiosity. Lydia shared stories from her later travels, explaining how she approached landmarks and cultural sites differently now. She talked about listening more, observing carefully, and being mindful of the people who dedicated their lives to certain roles, like the guard she had once mocked. After her speech, the audience asked questions. One student raised his hand nervously and said, "Weren't you scared when the guard shouted at you?" "I think I would have run away instantly," Lydia smiled. "I was scared, yes," she replied. But that fear wasn't just about being shouted at. It was realizing that I had disrespected someone doing their job. And that's something I wanted to make right in my own way, by learning from it, not repeating it. Another teacher asked how she had dealt with the negative attention online. Lydia explained honestly that it had been difficult at first. She had felt the sting of judgment and criticism, but she learned to turn it into a lesson, not a burden. She explained that the key was acknowledging mistakes, apologizing sincerely, and sharing the lesson rather than trying to erase or hide from the past. The workshop ended with applause. Several students approached her afterward, thanking her for sharing her experience. "I never thought about how a small action could have such a big effect," one young traveler said. Lydia nodded. "Most of us don't, but once you understand, you see the world differently." As she left the hall, she walked toward Buckingham Palace once again. This time she stayed behind the ropes, observing silently. The guards stood in formation, their expressions calm, their discipline clear. The rhythm of their boots hitting the pavement was steady, commanding respect from the crowd. She felt a sense of peace, realizing she had returned not as a careless tourist, but as someone who understood what the guards represented. A few tourists nearby laughed and tried to get attention from a guard. Lydia stepped closer and said softly, "Please don't bother them. It's not worth it." They looked surprised but nodded, respecting her advice. She realized that she could influence others positively now, using her story to guide people who might otherwise make the same mistake she had. Later that evening, Lydia reflected on the journey she had taken, from viral embarrassment to a platform where her story could educate others. She thought about the lessons of respect, discipline, and humility she had learned. The guard's command, once a moment of fear and regret, had become a symbol of professionalism and strength in her mind. She spent the night walking along the Thames, looking at the city lights reflecting on the water. The same city that had once been a place of panic now felt like a place of understanding. She realized that travel wasn't just about seeing sights. It was about experiencing the values and culture of each place. Every interaction, every moment could teach something important if approached with mindfulness and respect. As she boarded her flight home the next day, Lydia carried a small notebook with reflections from her travels and her workshop speech. She wrote about what she had learned from the Royal Guard, how viral moments could become lessons, and the importance of sharing those lessons responsibly. She knew that the story would stay with her forever, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of how growth often comes from the most unexpected experiences. Months later, she looked back at the events with gratitude. The video, once a symbol of her mistake, had sparked change, not just in her life but in the lives of people who had heard her story. The guard's silence, discipline, and brief breaking of protocol had taught her a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. She understood now that respect was powerful, humility was necessary, and mistakes could lead to lasting growth when approached with honesty and reflection. By the time Lydia returned home from her second trip to London, she felt a sense of closure that she hadn't experienced before. The embarrassment and anxiety from her viral moment outside Buckingham Palace had long since faded, replaced with reflection, humility, and gratitude. She realized that the incident had shaped her in ways she never expected, teaching her lessons that went far beyond travel or social media. It had taught her about respect, patience, responsibility, and the unexpected ways life could correct our mistakes. She began her mornings like she had for months, reviewing her blog posts and planning her next trips. But her focus had shifted. Instead of chasing photos, views, or likes, she concentrated on experiences and learning. She took the time to read about the places she visited, to understand the history and traditions of the people there. She wanted to immerse herself in the culture rather than just capture it. The mistakes of the past had shaped a new perspective, one that valued understanding over entertainment. Her friends noticed the change immediately. During conversations, she spoke more thoughtfully, listened more attentively, and expressed more patience. They teased her lightly, saying she had become a serious traveler, but there was no judgment in their teasing, only recognition of her growth. Lydia smiled, knowing that the lessons she had learned were not just for travel, they were for life. One afternoon, she received a surprise invitation from a school in her city. They had heard about her viral video, her apology, and her workshop in London. The school wanted her to speak to their students about cultural respect and responsible travel. She felt nervous at first, remembering the embarrassment she had once felt in front of millions online. But she also knew this was an opportunity to give back and prevent others from making the same mistakes she had made. When she arrived at the school, the students were buzzing with curiosity. They had seen clips online and read about her story, but they didn't know the full impact it had had on her life. Lydia stood at the front of the classroom, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. She began to speak, recounting the day at Buckingham Palace. She described the excitement she had felt, the careless decision to block the guard, and the instant regret when he shouted at her. But she also explained what she had learned from that moment, the importance of respect, the value of discipline, and the need to take responsibility for one's actions. The students listened attentively, asking questions about what she would do differently now. Lydia shared her reflections on mindfulness, cultural awareness, and the responsibility travelers had to honor the traditions and roles of the people they encountered. She emphasized that it wasn't just about avoiding embarrassment. It was about appreciating the effort and dedication that others put into their work and their roles in society. After the talk, several students approached her with thoughtful questions. One asked, "How did it feel to have so many people watch and judge you?" Lydia paused, then replied honestly, "At first it was overwhelming and frightening, but I realized that the opinions of others could either crush me or teach me. I chose to learn from the experience, and it changed how I see the world." Another student asked, "Do you ever regret going to London?" She smiled gently. "I would never regret it. That trip taught me more than I ever expected. Mistakes are part of learning, and sometimes the most embarrassing moments carry the biggest lessons." After leaving the school, Lydia felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't anticipated. Sharing her story in a positive way had allowed her to turn a personal mistake into a tool for growth, not just for herself, but for others. She realized that experiences, even the difficult ones, could become meaningful if approached with honesty, reflection, and care. Weeks later, she attended a travel conference where experienced travelers and writers shared their insights. Lydia was invited to speak on a panel about the responsibilities of tourists when visiting cultural landmarks. This time she felt confident. She talked about the Royal Guard incident as an example, but she focused on the lessons learned rather than the embarrassment. She described how respecting others' roles, being aware of local customs, and understanding the consequences of our actions could change the way we experience the world. During the panel, an experienced travel writer asked her, "What advice would you give to young travelers who might be tempted to seek attention like you once did?" Lydia answered thoughtfully, "Focus on learning rather than showing off. Be present in the moment, not in the frame of a camera. Respect the people and the places you visit. And remember that even small actions can have big impacts." The audience responded with applause, and afterward, several travelers approached her to thank her for her insights. Many shared their own stories of mistakes or misunderstandings while traveling, and Lydia listened with empathy. She realized that everyone made errors in judgment at some point, and it was the willingness to reflect and grow that truly mattered. Her experience had given her the ability to guide others and help them avoid similar pitfalls. One evening, as she walked through her own city, Lydia reflected on how much her perspective had changed. She remembered the chaotic moment outside Buckingham Palace, the shock of the guard's command, and the wave of online attention that followed. What had once felt like humiliation now felt like a turning point, a moment that reshaped her understanding of respect, discipline, and responsibility. She thought about the guard, his unwavering stance, and the calm authority he displayed. Although she never knew his name, she often imagined him standing silently in his post, performing his duties with dignity and precision. That memory reminded her that true strength and discipline didn't require attention or applause. It was silent, steadfast, and deeply rooted in responsibility. That was a lesson she carried in every aspect of her life now. Months later, she traveled again, this time to a smaller European city. She visited museums, historical sites, and cultural landmarks, always observing carefully and interacting respectfully. She spoke with guides, learned about traditions, and took the time to understand the significance behind each location. She captured her experiences through notes and sketches, rather than just photos and videos for social media. Travel had become about connection and growth, not about recognition or entertainment. During one visit, she noticed a group of young tourists laughing and joking loudly near a museum's historic guard display. She gently approached them and said, "Try to watch quietly. You'll understand so much more if you take it in respectfully." They looked at her and someone whispered, Aren't you that woman from the viral video? Lydia smiled and nodded. Yes, and I've learned my lesson, she said. I hope you learn yours too. The group quieted down and she stepped back, watching them pay closer attention to the display. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Her story, once a source of embarrassment, had become a tool to encourage understanding and respect in others. Back home, she continued writing and sharing her reflections on travel, culture, and respect. Her blog grew steadily, attracting readers who appreciated honesty and insight rather than sensational stories. She spoke at more workshops, shared advice with travelers, and became known for her thoughtful perspective. The viral incident that had once brought her embarrassment had evolved into a defining moment of personal growth and influence. Lydia often thought about the guard, the way he had broken protocol with a single command, and the lessons that moment had taught her. She realized that life often presents opportunities for growth in unexpected forms. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come through discomfort, humility, and reflection. She was grateful for the experience, knowing that it had shaped her into someone more aware, respectful, and compassionate years later. When she looked back at her journey, Lydia felt pride, not in the viral attention she had once gained, but in the growth and understanding that had emerged from it. The incident outside Buckingham Palace had been the spark, but it was her willingness to reflect, learn, and share that had turned it into something meaningful. She had learned that respect is earned through awareness and action, that mistakes are teachers in disguise, and that true growth comes when we are willing to see ourselves honestly and make better choices. Her travels continued, each new destination offering lessons, insights, and moments of reflection. Yet the memory of the Royal Guard remained vivid, a symbol of discipline, humility, and the lasting impact of a single, unassuming action. Lydia knew she would carry that lesson with her forever, using it not only to guide her own actions but also to inspire others to approach the world with respect, thoughtfulness, and an open heart.